Today we are in London, now near London Bridge, and I'm meeting here Thomas because I think it's a couple of months ago we met to talk about how do you actually build a unique culture in hospitality by actually leveraging the power of L&D, your learning and development, and how do you actually bring all that to life. And I called it something, it's the word I've been thinking about recently, actually the plumbing of actually culture is like really in the L&D world. So this is what we're going to talk a bit about that today, how they actually do it at Dishoom and how you actually bring that to life when you're building a culture on the go. And also we're going to talk a little bit about how they came back from the pandemic and actually how the role of L&D played in that. But we're not going to talk about all the horrible things that came with that. And so welcome to the show, Thomas. I'm extremely happy that you said yes and you wanted to join the other Mavericks on the show.
Thank you very much. Super excited to be here.
So, Thomas, I think we should start with your journey and a bit of context because I think you have a very interesting background from both people, hospitality, but also L&D point of view. You didn't wake up one day and thought, I'm going to be an L&D hospitality person. It came a bit by, like many things in hospitality, you ran into it. But it would be great to hear your journey and your story all the way from the States and to London.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's an interesting place to start because, I've been with Dishoom now for coming up to 11 years. So when I joined the business, there was just two restaurants. We had our restaurant in Covent Garden and then the restaurant where I joined in Shoreditch. And at that time, really, I was just, looking for some place, in between gigs because I just moved over from America into London and just getting going. So I guess my journey to London, even to get to that place, is quite interesting. So I grew up rural America, middle of nowhere. I think cowboys and Indians, and literally hunting and fishing. So it was a bit of a different, I guess, foundation where I came from. But then from there, food and drink has always been a part of who I am. So at an early age, I remember I really wanted to open my own restaurant. I must have been about 14 when that happened. And literally, there was only one restaurant in town. We didn't even have streetlights or anything. So I was like, okay, yeah, I want this restaurant. It's going to serve food, and what kind of food, I have no idea. But food and drink was really, really important to me. When I left high school in the States, I went to undergraduate at that place. At that time, I studied theater, so really getting into acting, both building sets and also being on stage. And a big part of that was just a natural curiosity about the world around me, curiosity to think about other places, to go other places. Even if living in rural America, if you couldn't go to, I don't know, Switzerland or something, you could do a play and you could learn about it. You could do Hamlet and learn about Denmark and all these things. So that was kind of that foundation. And that ended up giving me some legs just to travel around the States, travel around the world. I ended up getting my master's in Seattle, teaching at a university for a while. Eventually took me to Los Angeles, where I did film and television for a while, New York, worked off Broadway, did a bunch of different things. Long story short, by the time I came to London, I had been working in hospitality on and off for probably, I don't know, since I was about 16. And then being in London, you just kind of need to find your feet and pay the bills because it's a very expensive place. And there was Dishoom and there was I. But yeah, I guess that background and that journey is really kind of informed a lot about what I do now and how I think about the function, both within the organization and also how I think about the function of learning and development and how you can support and engage with our team. So yeah.
Actually, as you were talking there, there was a question that came up in my mind, like, what are the traits between these two worlds, hospitality and acting? Where can you see there's some connection? What are like the top three, traits of, you have these life skills that's transferable. Is there any you can see really clearly you took from the acting world into hospitality?
Yeah. Well, I should say that as good of an actor as I was, I never booked the jobs that I didn't want or I didn't think I was right for. And I think that's important because there was something about the project which is at its essence, did this speak to you? Was it something that you felt really resonated, a story that you wanted to tell? And early on for me, I recognized that whatever I did, whether it was how I engaged with other people, whether I was telling stories on stage or on camera, that I wanted to do something that helped people understand themselves better and to help almost like remove roadblocks in their way. Whether I could illustrate a situation, a story, and they'd say, gosh, I don't want to be doing that when I get further along. So I think that sense of helping people and connecting to people through art also really directly transfers over to hospitality. I mean, at its most basic level, whatever we do in hospitality, it's about creating a space where two people can come together, sit down, and they can just spend time with the people that they love. That's what hospitality is. And then the question is, how do you elevate that experience through food, design, service to make it something richer and done well? It's almost like a great hospitality experience helps you to fall in love with the people that you really want to be around with. It helps you get to know a little bit about yourself. And really, if it's done well, it helps you create an environment and a space that the people will look forward to and they'll remember for years. And I think that's really similar to great art as well, is the really lasting pieces that you see, whether it's a Rothko or a beautiful piece of music, it touches a different chord. And I think it's the same for food. You know, the great meals, the great drinks, the great experiences, they're greater than the sum of their parts because of all those elements that come together. And I guess for learning and development, it's saying, how can you harness all of these different threads of an experience of how we engage with other people, about how we develop people to help them engage with other people so that we can create one moment that just is beautiful for those people when they sit down.
Yeah, you talk about hospitality as an art, and recently over the last 12 months, I've been diving back into many of the interviews I've done here on the show, and lots of the leaders that's building, very unique culture. Really look at this hospitality is like an art, like a mastery they're pursuing. And I think that's what comes from, if you want to be a famous actor or in the world of entertainment, you're working towards mastery, but it's very difficult to define sometimes. It's just sometimes you create these moments and that was a special moment or that was a special role. And they talk about this, pursuit of mastery, and they build that into every parts of their organization. And actually, they are the best people they're looking for is actually also people that's just looking for achieving mastery, because then they can create these hospitality experience. And it sounds very much similar as you've been talking about when you start diving into what is actually the real reason they're doing what they're doing. Because often, many of them are not doing it from the outset for money. They need to run a business that's profitable, but it's actually about putting something better in the world. Actually, you talked about making people better and was seeking that, how can I help people become better and feel better in a way? And you ended up with Dishoom, and then you went into L&D again. If you think about a role, that's a very different world than acting, you would say from the paper. But again, talk a bit about how did that happen? Because I guess you were in the front line out there serving the customers, and then at some point you transitioned into a very important role within Dishoom.
Yeah, it's interesting that. And again, I think life works in mysterious ways. I think that's one of the good things about it is early on, I think I learned that sometimes you're presented with doorways in life, and you have a choice that you can make. You can either not open the door and stay where you're safe, which is known, or you can walk through the door and you can do something unknown. And you see that all the time. It's why we're sitting here having this conversation.
Sliding doors. Yeah.
Sliding doors. That's it. So I never had any desire to be a manager. Straight up. Like it wasn't in my wheelhouse, my ambitions, anything that I wanted to do. I very much, I was still working, doing lots of different things on the side when I joined Dishoom. So at that time I joined as a server on the floor, and it suited me well. It did what I needed to do, and it allowed me to kind of work someplace with a culture that really aligned to me, but also gave me the flexibility to continue to, I guess, grow as a person outside of it, in that other profession. But, you just to go back to what you were just saying, you talked about mastery and how how the pursuit of mastery is something that a lot of people talk about. I see things just from a slightly different angle. So I'm Buddhist, and one of the things that I really think a lot about is, what is perfection? What's the end goal? What are we aiming for? And I don't think there's a destination which is you are the master of things. I don't think there's an end goal where we say, now I know everything. I see it more like every day we have the opportunity to learn just a little bit more, to take another step, to have exposure to something that maybe we didn't know yesterday. And through that gradual, slow refinement of process and growth and learning and just exposing ourselves and walking through those doors that come open, we become a little bit more of ourselves. We become a little bit more aware of who we are, how we want to present ourselves in the world, and how we want to engage with others. And whilst the place that we end up is knowing how to be better at our craft, learning how to be better communicating, better at whatever it is we might doing. I think if we say, I want to become a master when we start, we stop ourselves growing because we say, unless I get there, I don't actually know where I'm going. And I say, actually, forget that, throw it out the window. Let's just be a little bit better today than we were yesterday. And that, if that's all that we do, where we get to in a year's time is very different. And I think for me, that fundamental belief about how I see people and growth and the world meant that by the time I hit Dishoom, really I was in a place where I could see that there were other team members who were coming into hospitality, really doing great, but ultimately they wanted to be actors and dancers and musicians, DJs, architects.
They went the other way.
They went the other way. And in a way, it's kind of like, you could say, well, my job is to hold on to those people and to keep them forever. But I was like, actually, you know what? I'm in that camp too. People come here and they just want to be someplace that's great. They want to work with other people who are really big-hearted and kind. And they want to continue growing in all the ways that they want in their lives. So when they become a yoga teacher, they're a better yoga teacher because of it. And that for me really meant that pretty soon I was transitioning into a trainer for Shoreditch. I was training all the team members when they were coming in, doing beer and wine classes. And at that time, we had our initial Daruwala, Carl Brown, who made all of our drinks, who's like a genius. So like one of my mentors early on in food and drink was Carl, and he was teaching me everything, about drinks. And I was really blessed. And I would also spend lots of time with our executive chef, Navid, at the time, who helped write the Dishoom cookbook. So I kind of had these big mentors in my life. And also I had this other mentor with Brian, who is he's our managing director now, but to really think about service. So by the time we got to opening our third branch, which was King's Cross, I remember Brian saying to me, listen, Tom, we really want you to come in and be a manager. And I was like, absolutely not. I really love training people. I love empowering them. I love helping them so that they learn a little bit more about themselves so that they can go do what they want and be better people. He's like, well, that job doesn't exist. I was like, okay, cool, no problem. And a couple of weeks later, they came back and they said, well, we've made this job for you. We'll see how it looks and we'll pull it together. And I was like, cool, sounds good. That afternoon, I was off the floor, helping actively to hire for our King's Cross branch. And, really from that point, really didn't look back. And I guess at that point, transitioned into the trainer, helped to open all of our restaurants from King's Cross forward, and helped to really scale the business from 200 to almost 2,000 that we're at today. At the heart of it for me is that key belief that whatever we do, whatever size it is as a business, we've got to help people grow. We have to help them become bigger, stronger, more powerful versions of themselves. And that's been a through line. And it's interesting because that mission and that belief also meant that as I spent more time in Dishoom, more time focusing on others and more time focusing on helping them grow, it kind of made me reflect on that acting past, which also the driving force behind it was to say, how do I help people understand themselves so that they can become better people? And I saw these two worlds coming together. And these days, I mean, as we kind of sit here inside this podcast studio with cameras and lights and everything, this is my past. This is my world that I really know quite well. Yeah. But also, I think there's a real question about how do you take all those doors that you walked through in the past, all that information, the journeys, the people that you met, that knowledge, and how do you bring it together for what you're doing now? And I think I'm blessed with L&D and Dishoom because much like this, we have our own internal production company. We have a whole team of designers. We're writing gorgeous collateral and copy and workbooks. We've got a whole digital ecosystem that brings things to life. And also we kind of have a bit of freedom to say, well, what do we think great L&D looks like? How can we best empower and support our team? And then we say, well, let's go figure out how to do it. So we can almost be as creative as we want in the learning and development space. And through that, we've made some pretty awesome things, which again, is part of that old world and part of the new world really coming together.
There's one thing I just wanted to jump back on your past, and you said, it was really interesting, that I don't want to be a manager. And I guess in some capacity, what you have become, if not a manager, you definitely become a leader. In a way, you're helping setting the future for how we make people at Dishoom better. Has that, in a way, disappeared in a bit as you've been working with an area that's really close to your heart? It's actually been easier to be the manager because it was not operation, or this was really the thing you wanted?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between managers and leaders. And I think when you think about leadership, there's lots of schools of thought about different styles of leadership. And within Dishoom, we kind of have this core philosophy, which again resonates with me, which is like servant leadership. I am there to help people. My job is to help the team around me become enabled so that they can do their jobs differently. And that servant leadership, I suppose that's where I hang my hat these days. Of course, I have responsibility. Of course, I have a team that I manage. But ultimately, when I walk into our cafes and I see our team on the floor, I can connect with them, and we do have different rapport, and we have different ways of connecting, both because of our past on the floor, but also just because if you see yourself as somebody who's managing other people, fundamentally, as a leader of people and as somebody who's there to help with their growth and their development, I never really understand their challenges. I never understand how to actually help them. So I take those lenses off and I say, I'd rather be with you guys. I'd rather get to know you. I'd rather get to find ways to solve the problems that you're facing as opposed to the problems that I think you're facing.
Yeah, and that's principle leadership, in principle, asking the right question.
Exactly.
So let's talk a bit about Dishoom, because there's still people, believe it or not, if you're living in the UK or you've been to London many times, have not. So I actually took a Danish friend of mine, actually from the people space, to Dishoom on Tuesday last week. And he was absolutely blown away. He loved the Black Dial. Who doesn't? And he was sitting there and looking through, a typical ex-HR director, now a thought leader, traveling around the world, trying to create a happy workforce. And he was sitting and looking at that, how the experience came together. And he could see that, the people meet the service expectation, meets the loyalty of the guest, because you could also feel there's a lot of repeat people in that room when you hear them talking at the table. And there was always, you can hear some people were navigating the menu for other people. So, this is what you need to take, And I was doing the same for him. But can you talk a bit about the size of Dishoom and why it's such a unique place? Because you already touched on that. It's a very unique place to be, and you've been there for a decade. And in any industry, that will be a long time. In hospitality, that's very long.
Well, I'm not the only one in Dishoom. So last week we kind of had a party to hand over for different tenures. So as a part of that, they put your portrait on the wall in your cafe. So in Shoreditch, there's a big picture of me. So if you go in, take a look at table 60, you'll see my picture. But also my friend Raju, who is a head waiter that I worked with, he's there as well. But there's loads of us. I think there's 15 of us that have been there for over a decade.
Wow.
So I guess, let's see, Dishoom. Right now we've got 10 restaurants in the UK. There's most of those are in London. Outside of London, we have one in Manchester, Edinburgh, and Birmingham. We also have a delivery arm. There's 13 or 14 delivery kitchens. I say 13 to 14. We'll be looking to open one of our other sites in Cambridge this year. And when that happens, that becomes both a restaurant as well as a delivery site. So it's kind of, it changes. And we also have a concept which is called the permit room. So So it's brand new. So we just opened our first one in Brighton, which is gorgeous. It's on the lanes.
Great location.
It's so good. It's just by the pier, and you walk out. We were talking before, but in the summer, it's going to be so good. But it's almost like if Dishoom were to open a small pub, so you can bring your dog in. They've got beautiful half roast chicken that's gorgeous, and the cocktails are like banging. They're so good. So with all of those, we've got about 2,000 people spread across the business in all those different functions. We also have a Dishoom at home piece, which is really about saying, if you live in Aberdeen and you really love Dishoom and you want that black doll, how can you get it? So there's a home delivery. So you can both have some of the food, but also some of our different cocktails and all sorts of things. But we've changed a little bit. So we also have loads of events. Ramadan just passed, so we have lots of Eid events and iftars and things for communities. In the past, we've done large yoga events for the community in our King's Cross space, kind of partnering with one of the universities. We've also done loads of festivals and things. We did Lost Village, so a bunch of food. And we also, we're a bit of a different business. So we're not just bricks and mortar restaurants, but when we opened our Kensington branch, we had an immersive theater event. We partnered with a business. So we did a live song and dance, and all of our actors, they were on the floor singing, and there was also a meal service through it. For our Carnaby branch, we released our own album, which is called the Slip Disc, which is pretty cool. And we brought over a bunch of rock stars from India to kind of be there to support the opening. And for our most recent, kind of our larger restaurant in Battersea, we actually released our own comic book, which is all about how somebody from a young girl from the 1950s sees the future and really kind of bringing together these different worlds. So it's really, Dishoom as a whole, it's really diverse. We have beautiful restaurants, and they're big restaurants. The smallest is about 7,000 square feet. The largest is huge. We see somewhere between 10 to 14,000 guests a week. And we've got beautiful breakfast, beautiful black doll, and great cocktails. So,
and the reason why I wanted you to go through that is also for the audience that don't know the Dishoom, actually the complexity of this business and the importance of culture to underpin that. And you see that in other businesses. One of the business I, compare, and you could like it or not, but like the Singerman's community of businesses in the state, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you have these 16 different businesses, totally complex, but actually it's all underpinned by their unique approach to servant leadership is actually one of them, and thereby also their culture and their vision for the future and how they actually create that. And no place is the same. It's a unique experience in every place.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about what makes, in your view, from being part of the journey, what makes Dishoom such a unique culture, both when it comes to creating, the employee experience, but also that, of course, reflects in that experience I got with my friend last week in Carnaby.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the interesting things I think about for restaurants and great businesses, you really think about you think about it in different ways. You've got food and drink, you've also got your design, and you've also got service. Now, those are kind of your three big areas of influence. Now, to be in London, to be a great restaurant operating at any scale, you've got to have great service, you've got to have great food, and the design has to be good. Frankly, even if you think about the number of restaurants that you walk by on your lunch break, getting a coffee or something, it's crazy. The competition is out there. So for us, I think the overlap of those three, they come together. That's where our culture lives. And a lot of businesses, trying to identify who are we, where do we come from, it kind of feels a bit like an exercise which is going from the out in, trying to define it, putting things into that cultural space. But for Dishoom, we're blessed because Kavi and Shamal, our co-founders, they're excellent. And I think when they set up the business, the real foundation, the bones of who we are, come from the authentic Irani cafes in Bombay. And I think the great thing about that for us is that the closer you get to those original Irani cafes, you start to pull it apart and you see how those elements, they come together. Now, we could talk another podcast just about that. But these original Irani cafes, they were the first places in Bombay, really, where anybody was welcome. And because there was a lot of that population was Hindu, it meant that there was a caste system in place. So some people might not be able to come into the cafe. For example, if you were a prime minister, you might not be able to come in and sit next to lawyers, let alone all the students, let alone the people working on the street and all these things. So these Irani cafes, they were the first places where anybody from any any walk of life could come in and have a simple chai and have a bite to eat. And that specificity and that openness meant that you suddenly had these places that were breaking down barriers where everyone was welcome. And I think that's represented both in the design about those places that, actively, embrace different cultures, different religions to come in, and also the food that's representative. So when the closer as a business we got to that, I think it also meant that who we were and how we were creating and defining and sharing our culture was pulled from that. So you have this beautiful tapestry to pull from. Now, the other thing, in addition to the Irani cafes, is coming from our Indian heritage, is really the DNA of Dishoom, and that's seva. So seva in Hindi translates as selfless service. It basically means you give something to somebody else without expecting anything in return. And at its simple level, you think, gosh, okay, well, that's a pretty powerful thing. But, I already do that. If somebody was in my house, of course, I would give them another cup of tea before they asked. If it was your mom and she was going to some restaurant and had never been there before, you would hope that they would, give her a glass while she was waiting of water and, engage with her and, find out and give her a comfy seat, right? So we think about that pretty simple. But for us as a business, again, we're in a business where you think about service charge. You're in a business where you think about, as a waiter, I have to sell something so that then I can get tips, so that then I can have money. And me being an American, I think that idea of selling to get something, that's just baked into hospitality. But when you layer it on top of this thing, it's like, I give something without expecting anything back. This goes back to everything that really resonated with me, this idea of Buddhism, this idea about continuous development, this idea about helping other people for the sake of helping other people. And that idea of like seva, it really etched itself into the bones of Dishoom. So now we think about it kind of not only like selfless service, but we think about it in two ways. We practice it in two ways. Big heart and first class, doing whatever you do in the most generous and big-hearted way. And the second way is doing everything in the most first class way. So I think that's really the essence of it. And then you think, okay, cool. So we're going to open this big, busy restaurant in Carnaby. It's going to be rammed in a Monday morning or a Tuesday afternoon or a Saturday night. But also, in the most big-hearted restaurant in London, how would you welcome people? Of course, you're going to welcome them in the front with eye contact. And of course, if it's busy and it's raining, you're going to go outside with an umbrella. And of course, if they come in and they're waiting because their friends are here, because they've never been to London before, because they're from Chicago and they're lost on the tube and they went south on the Northern Line instead of north on the Northern Line, of course, you're going to say, guys, don't worry about it. Sit, have a drink on me while you wait. It's no problem. But then also on the other side of it, it's like, okay, we might be really kind in how we're taking care of them, but what's the most first class way of doing that? You got to make sure that you actually have that umbrella. You got to make sure your back of house is in order so that you've got somebody at the door who can welcome people with eye contact and that big smile. You've got to make sure those drinks that they're drinking are beautiful and consistent. And you got to make sure everything is just at the right level so that once that friend arrives, because they've been on the Northern Line and they sit down, that they can focus on what's really important. And remember, the design's going to be great. The food is beautiful. The service is going to be good because it's from the heart. But everybody's there not to see those things. They're there to spend time with the people that they love, which I think is the interesting thing, because Dishoom at its best, and you walk in and you see it, you can always tell when the guests are, enjoying themselves because their phone's away. If you think about all the restaurants you go into and, your phone is this part of your experience, you keep it on your table, you wait for it to buzz, you're talking to somebody else. In Dishoom, we don't have that. People go in and they sit with each other and they're very much with each other in that space. And that's both being with the people that they love and letting the service enable that. That's having great food that people can connect over. That's also being in spaces that are really beautiful that you want to linger over. And suddenly you create this thriving space that allows for that kind of connection to happen. And I'm not thinking about the outside world. I'm not thinking about, gosh, what about that text message or that email that I need to do? Because this is the moment.
It's very interesting. Actually, you made me think back on last Tuesday. So my friend had his phone there, and then during, very quickly within, and it's now I'm clocking it, he actually put the phone in his bag. So the phone disappeared in a way. And then it went up again when you had to take a picture. We've been there, and he thought it was great. And he wanted a copy of the menu. But again, it really created that experience. And that was a very busy time, but it was still like the touch that was on the table from the two different waiters and the conversation we had just became great,
Well, we live in We live in a very temporary world. We live in a world where we don't fully connect with others, where we're not fully present, where we don't give ourselves to the moment, and we're kind of multitasking at the same time. Yeah. And I think it's really rare to have a space where that happens. But in order to create that kind of genuine connection for others, it also takes a real amount of specificity on our side to enable that. And again, the old saying for us is everything is there for a reason. Every picture on the wall, every steel cup on the table, every chutney is handcrafted, every single ingredient that goes into that black dal, every single team member is specifically selected because they share a cultural like a similarity. Yeah. And all of these elements come together so that you can have a really great meal, and you'll look back on it and you'll say, gosh, that was one of the best meals I've had in the past month, the past year. And I think that's pretty special.
Yeah, well, he said it's the best meal he had for 2 years. So
there you go. Maybe he hadn't eaten though for 2 years.
Yeah, I think he had.
He was very hungry.
He loves food. But what's really interesting you talk about here is, again, we were talking about this, you touch on as well, the complexity of running a business like Dishoom, and also being consistent. And that's really where it becomes really interesting when you have to deliver this culture you're talking about, the culture where you are giving more than you take in principle. Can you talk a bit about then what is the role of L&D in this? Because I think it's really interesting. The conversation we have had a couple of times, and then as said before, not very sexy. I'm almost starting to see now, as I evolve in my thinking around what is, HR's, but more L&D's role is really the plumbing of culture sometimes. It's actually the ability to bring culture to life. When you really define and have clarity of what it is, as you can hear, there's a very big, strong clarity and connection of what the culture is and the purpose is of Dishoom, then L&D becomes the plumbing in a way to make sure it's maintained and brought out to the front line and experienced all the way into the last moment I go out of that restaurant, I feel I was in a special place. Can you talk a bit about that and the L&D's role is to create that plumbing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think about it in a couple of ways. The first way is probably through music. And our operation is complex. Our servers have over 30 individual points of service. On any one night, we'll have something between 9 and 11 hosts working in the team. We'll have, there's 20 chefs in the kitchen. I've got food runners and expediters. There'll be about 65 individual team members working on any one night. And in that evening, there's something like 50 plus individual touch points for the guests. So it's a complicated operation in that sense. And I think for us in L&D, there's a real question about okay, how do we get people there? How do we get people to understand what it is that they need to do if you're outside with those umbrellas, if you're inside looking at the host desk, shaking cocktails on the floor? And one of the things that I kind of go back to is great hospitality isn't just the cocktail. The cocktail's a big part of it. And you need to know how to make a great cocktail. You need to know how to keep your bar clean. You need to know how to tell the difference between all of your different sweet vermouths and your dry vermouths on the back bar, and to be able to make a really great classic if you need to. That's not great hospitality. It's the same as making music. To be a great jazz musician, you need to know the scales. You need to know how to play in tune. And when you pick up your trumpet, you need to make sure you can play it consistently, and you need to practice that instrument. But once you know how to play that instrument, and once you know your cocktails and all of your individual points of service, you then forget about it. And then you do the thing that is really most important. And what's most important is engaging with those guests, finding ways to elevate that experience, for a trumpet player in the jazz experience, finding ways to then forget about the scales so that you can play the jazz, because that's what everybody wants to hear. And for me in L&D, it's there's different ways to get there. I think, do you tell people what they need to learn, or do you encourage people to get there? I'm always looking for this individual spark that exists, because I believe that even if you want to be a great bartender, you have to have something to light that passion. What do you love about drinks? Why do you want to be here? And how do I find that passion, and how do I ignite it and to create a bigger spark and allow that passion to go into other areas, to talk about beer, to talk about wine, to talk about how they engage with guests? And when I do that, I'm not talking about the individual order of service anymore. I'm talking about a learning ecosystem. I'm talking about a growth mindset, how we encourage people to continually learn, continually develop, and to continually challenge themselves to be bigger and stronger and better than they were before. And that's not because I'm telling them to do it. I'm saying, guys, this is just a place where we do that.
And how do you then, from like you say, very tactical for an L&D approach, create a strategy that delivers that?
Yeah.
Or I guess you have numbers of strategies. Every year there's a new strategy, but how do you actually continue evolving that? Because I guess as the organization grows, that also has to evolve the way we do that. And I guess there's an element of, culture does a lot and gives a lot of answers. But again, how do you systemize? Because any good business, no matter what, is built up of a number of systems where L&D is one system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is the other half of the conversation is there's different ways in which we look at this within the organization. And I think I think of it in three different ways, and this is the learning ecosystem. I think we've got a great team of face-to-face trainers, old school hospitality. When you come in on day one, you meet somebody who's an incredible teacher, who's a guru about knowledge, who knows everything, somebody that we've worked with. We've got a full induction program that they go through. And, if they don't have anything else, they can be your teacher and they'll just stand there and deliver everything. And they're excellent. Beside them sit a whole host of really like hard documents and hard training packs. We did a big piece of work looking at our workbooks to rewrite all of those, to look at how we can make, again, how can they be the most big-hearted? How can they be the most first class? So they're culture imbued, and it's as if you picked up an old book if you were in Bombay from the shelf in the library, and they look like they've been knocked around for about 50 years. But again, within it's the workbook, it's the checklist that you follow. And to build those, we looked outside of our sector. We said, well, if you want to have a really great workbook, how do you do it? So we read a lot of flight check manuals from Boeing. We looked at Nike. We looked at Apple. We looked at something like 37 different onboarding processes from different sectors. And through that, we created this workbook that both is culture saturated and rich for Dishoom, introduced checklists at the point of need, but also allows for flexibility for the learners. So even if they start on a day and it's busy and the training doesn't go quite how we expected, their trainer's really good, so they're still going to get a great welcome and know the people that they need to. But before they take their test, they almost have like a pre-flight checklist that they have to take to make sure that they really know it. And if they don't know it, guys, we're going to protect the training. Let's go back. Let's take time. We've got flex. So I think we've got that face-to-face trainer. We also have really great physical assets. And then the other piece that I have beside it, which is it's our tech stack. And I think, again, traditionally you would say you would push content out through a learning management system, force people to do it. You've got X number of days to finish it. And then if you don't do it, it's going to mark off. Now, there's like the carrot and the stick approach, right? So sometimes we need to use the stick and we need to make sure people are finishing what they need to do. And I guess that's just to make sure that compliance gets where it needs to do and initiatives and things. But that's not learning at its best. That doesn't encourage a growth mindset. That doesn't help the business grow. And fundamentally, it's not the space that I want to be in. What we have is it's a host of resources. So coming out of COVID, what we had done is we had a challenge that a lot of other operators face, which was we had something like 1,600 people on furlough across the country, and we needed to make sure they really got up to speed. And also we had an expectation from all of our guests who were coming in, because again, like your friend, he wanted to have that great meal that he had that was the best I've had in 2 years. And where am I going to go after COVID? Well, let's go to that place. So we have a lot of expectation. For us, I was saying, well, how do we help people get to that place? How do we help our team? And that was the point where we created something which we called it's called the Learning Library. So kind of pulling on all of our old, I guess, wheelhouse of skills, we found internal team members who had written scripts for the West End. We found editors. We found filmmakers. We taught our chefs how to act. We bought an entire production kit from scratch, and we built a website internally for like 27 quid a month. And so we shot something like 180 micro-learning videos using our team as really the focal point for it and the voice of it. We hosted our own website, which was bespoke, culture saturated, have videos and images and maps of those Irani cafes. We had our founder Shamil come in, talk about our Dharma, culture, Seva. We had our MD Brian come in, talk about really our service principles and coming out of it. Our executive chef come in, talk about all the specifics, the dishes, the garnishes, but all in a way that wasn't required. all in a way that was really punchy, poppy, short, really digestible and actionable, so that when we shared it with our team, it was something that you would want to watch on the night bus home. So that's our digital stack. So again, the way in which all of these work is I kind of think of that digital thing as almost being like the repository of information for Dishoom. I've got a great face-to-face trainer, and our workbooks are really bespoke to make sure you learn everything that you need to do. These work together. So our workbooks, they integrate with our digital assets, sharing QR codes, specific content at the moment of need. So on day 2, if you're that bartender and you need to learn about our wines, there's a QR code so you can learn about how to taste wine from one of our general managers who's a level 3 sommelier who's awesome. If you need to learn about, I don't know, the specific garnishes, here's a video from one of our senior chefs talking about why garnishes are really so important. So all of these come together to create a space where for the learners coming in, it's just rich and at their fingertips and you want to learn. So I think that same level of detail and complexity we also apply to all of our other programs. We have something called Babu Masterclass, which is our leadership development program, which we've been rewriting and working with some pretty exciting partners. That's super exciting. We have our Kitchen Academy where all of our chefs go through, they learn how to cook, all the basics, really like fine-tuning their craft. And most of these chefs were pretty excellent to begin with. So this is a place just to refresh all of their skill set. We've had bartender training program, all sorts of different initiatives, but all of them hinge on this idea, which is how can we help people grow? How can we help people develop in a way that feels right for them, in a way that actually, enables them to become really great leaders within Dishoom? And if and when they ever leave Dishoom, they can look back and say, this was the place where I learned how to, become a better bartender. I learned about servant leadership. I learned about how to make sure my waitlist was really tight and clean so that I could help run a slicker operation. Because again, the focus is on people. The focus is on your friend or my mom or all those people coming in so they can connect. We just need to make sure those elements are all aligned.
I think it's super interesting, and it comes back to the first class experience also then on the people side, where from what you told me before, it's almost like a Netflix kind of experience in that quality. And I think often training becomes more like we need to tick the box and do the training, and we use maybe the same person all the way through the training, an actor or one employee we can trust, instead of involving the organization. Actually, I've seen other organizations that have done that really with, very high skill. And even though if people are nervous, they also develop by that. They get really, they learn some things to go in front of a camera is a big thing, to learn to talk to an audience, to be the front of that specific thing. And again, it comes back to that pursuit as well of mastery, where you said it's not about perfectionism, but it's actually about developing and actually can see that journey in these touch points and help people navigate the learning as well. I love that with the QR codes and so on. How do you see that the next big thing is when it comes to, because you talked about tech stack, and really because AI has come into all the conversation. And I think technology is extremely important. And that's also what you said. There's the 3-dimensional where you sit down and write down the principles, the culture, the book of culture, the rules, the way we look at the world. So the leadership, you've done all that work. Then you've done the digital universe. And now AI comes into the play. How do you see that impact, learning and development, and especially in a hospitality context?
Yeah, we're at a change in time and humanity, and AI is. I think we don't quite know what it is and where it will take us, and I think there's a lot of conversation in our industry and outside of the sector, all industries. How are you leveraging AI? How are you using it? And it's a buzzword, frankly. At this moment in time, there's an expectation from consumers about what AI is. And I think there's an expectation from businesses that they leverage it. But really, like, getting down to nitty gritty about how we use it, it's unknown. That being said, I think if you understand how AI really can come together to automate certain processes, to become almost, we internally within our team, we call it our Ivy League assistant who sits with us. We all have our AI ChatGPT accounts, which we leverage daily. It almost becomes this tool that you can say, well, how do we use this to help to start writing what's on the page? How do we use this to maybe get over that fear of, creating that first draft and maybe give something along so we can speed up the process? But I think really that's just the first step. We're at a place now where if you think about learning, the way in which traditional businesses approach learning is, I've got a piece of content, either it's Netflix or it's some sort of SCORM content that sits somewhere else. And either I hope that you go and you find it, or I push it to you and then you find it.
Yeah.
But I think what we're getting to is it's a bit more of a hand-to-mouth learning experience. You think about how we use our mobile devices, how we use Google, how we use all of the different resources. We want a question to something, so we'll search for it at the moment of need on Google. We'll say, how do I get to this podcast studio today? Yeah. It'll find it for me. It will put it there. But equally so, I think we're at a place with learning where learners are making that cocktail in the moment. I need to know this information now. And by doing that, it's almost, how do I then plug in all of my resources from that tech stack into my AI tool so that I can find the measures for that cocktail when I need it? How can I use it to help create faster content by uploading a simple PDF that then turns that into my SCORM content? How can I use it to really drop in the forecast for team turnover for the past 6 months to forecast where we're going for the next 6 months? All of which synthesizing it into a really beautiful dashboard that is pulled seamlessly on the other side, so that my learners can log into that program and just search for their cocktail. But behind the scenes, I know that it's presenting information, churning that data, and allowing me, really from a driver's seat, being able to say, cool, how can we help shape and encourage our team and give them better resources when they need it? I think AI is really interesting. And for hospitality, there's a fear, I think, about how does tech and hospitality sit side by side? Because again, you see these things in like China, you've got the robotic, waiters coming around who are like singing you happy birthday and things. Yeah. And it's like, is that where we're going? God, I hope it's not where we're going. And I imagine for some places we might be going there, and maybe that's the right solution. But I also think for genuine hospitality, it is a space for people to connect, and it is a space for people to, share time and experiences with each other. That's what we learned coming out of COVID. So I think we have to find a way to leverage AI to help us do what we're doing more precisely in more efficient ways, but also not in a way that gets in the way of really that connection of people. Because if we've done that, fundamentally, we've lost something big, which is why people go out to eat in the first place.
And I guess also that's where hospitality really have this opportunity, if you can then leverage the AI into your business and take away, all the mundane things you need to do, but also give better insights, as you're talking about here. We're actually on the right track here. We're actually moving the L&D strategy, all the culture in the right direction, because it's really interesting. The people really embrace it. I did an interview last week with Josh from Wingshack, and he talked about how he was never able to understand his customer reviews as well as he is now, because actually now he can actually analyze them when they come in from all the different platforms.
Right.
And that's just an example. On the customer side, that could also be your employee data and feedback, where you can do an employee survey on 2,000 people. That will be a lot of insights to consume.
Yeah, exactly. But that's only half of it, right? Because if you've got 6,000 guest reviews and you run them through the AI and you're able to get the top 10 hits for it, as a learning manager, you're then able to look at and action it. I talk about my face-to-face trainers. Yeah. I'm able to see trends that are happening in the moment, push it out to my team so I can action it sooner, which is just level one. That's before we actually think, okay, based on the past 3 years, what were the trends that came in with my summer guests coming in? How were they thinking about outside dining spaces, expectations, summer menu, and how can I be front-footed on menu development, anticipating turnover, and really just getting on the front foot ahead of opens and things? Like, there's so much there.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be interesting. I think you're absolutely right. We are in the early days, especially when you talk AI and people. I think we're a bit further maybe on the consumer-facing sales marketing point of view, but really when it comes to the employee experience, we're really, really in the early days. And I think general tech and employee experience is really, really early days.
There's a couple people out there who are breaking ground.
Yeah.
And I think that's some pretty cool stuff, because
who should we be looking at outside the sector, I guess?
There's a couple organizations who are doing it. There's some LMS providers, and you think about like Thrive and a Docebo. They've kind of building into it their AI tech stack, which is good. But there's a Scandinavian company called Sono, which is again bringing together the really a lot of these tools so that they're forward facing for me as I'm building it, but also for the team. And what we're getting closer and closer to is a single search bar, which is your learning stack. And you search for what you need and it gives you the answers in the moment of it. So yeah, although it's at its early stages, I think there's some early adopters out there who are breaking some ground. And, hospitality, really, we're loath to change because so much of our focus is on, that guest special and thinking about footfall this week and making sure that my spend per head is where it needs to be, which is all right. That's how we keep our restaurant doors open, and that's how we make sure that we're making really great coffees and cocktails. But also there's the other piece, which is we have to be forward thinking. We have to be early adopters, and we have to be saying, where is this going? Because our teams are not the same teams as they were 5 years ago. Their expectations for how they learn, how they engage, how they receive content from a business, and how they're able to action it and share it with guests is different. And I think AI it's going to help us get there, but also I think together we can define what that conversation is, because we still don't know all of the pieces yet.
A couple more questions, because I've always, in a good conversation, run out of time at some point. But I really want to hear your thoughts around what is like your top advice for leaders out there that is building a business as a force for good and want to do the element of what your own experience has been with Dishoom. But what would you say your number one advice in the world we're in today, right now?
Yeah, well, I guess it's not really my advice. It's the advice that I've been exposed to. Our co-founders, Kavi and Shamil, early on, they introduced something in Dishoom, which I think really changed who we are. It's, of course, you've got to have awesome food and drink, happy team, and you really have to have really happy guests, right? But also, I think one of those things that they looked at was how can we be great for the communities that we're a part of? How can we give back to them? And at that point, it was coming out of Ramadan, it must have been a couple of years ago now, where we decided at that time to donate a meal for every guest that came into Dishoom. And at that time, we just had it for that Ramadan, and we gave back to we had a charity partner here in the UK called Magic Breakfast, and we had a charity partner in India called Akshaya Patra. So Magic Breakfast gives meals to kids who otherwise wouldn't have a meal before they go to school, so that way they can really focus. And Akshaya Patra in India, they provide meals, again, to kids who wouldn't have the same thing. But in India, it's very different, because a lot of those kids that we're feeding are kids that really, without that meal, they might not go to school in the first place. So a lot of them, we have young girls who, again, having that meal means a family can send their girl to school, obviously for the education, but also they can have that meal. So that initial charity that we put into place, quickly we decided that this was something that not just needed to live for that one period, but it needed to be hardwired into Dishoom and our DNA. So since then, our Meal for a Meal charity is really just a part of who we are and is built into the business from the ground up. And for our business, what that means is, since it's been in place, we fed over 20 million kids around the world. And for our team, it also means that they're partnered with specific charity schools, both in the UK and in India. And we really think about how our team engage with that, because, for every shift, rather than looking at the number of guests or the spend per head, we're saying, listen, you work this one shift, you're feeding 50 kids.
Wow.
And taking what we do, but actually saying, just by being a part of what we do and who we are, you're making the world a better place.
So the advice is put good into your business model in every angle you can and measure on it and use that as exactly. I love that. It's a great way to end a conversation and wish to go on for longer. There may be a second conversation here. As you already said, there's much more to explore. Where can people find out more about Dishoom? How can they connect with you and think, I had so much else I wanted to ask Thomas about?
For sure. Well, you can find Dishoom. Just take a look. I mean, you can Google us. We're on LinkedIn. There was a Bollywood movie called Dishoom a while ago. So if you see people who are fist fighting and guns, that's not where I work. But yeah, in terms of me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Drop me a message. I'll say hi. So
yeah, we'll drop all the links into the show notes as well. Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey and also how you build culture through L&D at Dishoom.
Thank you very much.